So to move on, we'll talk about, it's an interesting sort of segue. So analogies are important. They're good tools for us to use. Sometimes they're useful, sometimes they're not. So if I might ask the audience, what's the most common sort of analogy that we use when we talk about coffee? Coffee wants to be more like wine. Okay, so it's wine. It makes sense though. It's an agricultural product. It goes through the same sort of similar value-added processes that to become a specialty beverage from an agricultural product. There are obviously a lot of differences, but specialty coffee and wine do share a lot of attributes, the way terroir and variety relate to flavors. And I think it's safe to say that our industry wants desperately to get a piece of that respect and status that wine occupies in the culinary world. So we asked as I wondered about this, we wondered about this and maybe asked, what might someone like, say, the editor-in-chief of Bon Appetit have to say about that?
I think the one challenge that coffee is facing now is you want to stress the quality of it, but you don't want to. You got to watch out from becoming like coffee snobs, just like wine snobs. No one likes to hear people talk about wine. It's the most boring thing in the world.
Well, I think a lot of people are scared of like doing it wrong or getting it wrong or being lectured to about what the right way to do it is, and I think that's a hindrance. That's a hindrance to wine. People hate wine snobs, you know.
So with wine, wine is something. There was always this sort of mystification surrounding wine that we, as a magazine, try to sort of debunk a little bit and say, look, it's not as complicated as you think it is. It's mostly just about the enjoyment of it.
But on the other hand, if you pour a good glass of wine and a bad one, they're going to be like, well, I really like that one a lot more. So people can discern the quality differences in things, but they don't like being told what they're supposed to know about something or what they're supposed to like, or even a lot of the elaborate sort of language can be very off-putting to most people. I mean, it's very important to a small group of people.
But, wine has been wrapped in this mystique for so long. Coffee, I think, for a long time was not wrapped in that mystique. Coffee was the most basic, straight-ahead, uncomplicated thing. So when you start talking about the difference in flavor profiles and exotic sourcing and whether it's shade-grown or fairly traded, I think you're complicating something that for a long time people saw as being thoroughly uncomplicated. And I think there is going to be some resistance to that.
That's a hard question, because on the one hand, I'd say, well, it should be easier to brew. I mean, I think that there are definitely companies that have made it really easy to brew, and plenty of products that have done so. But to get a really good cup of coffee takes a long time. I personally brew mine in a Chemex, and it takes forever. And when you have like a dinner party and you need to get coffee out to 10 people really fast, it's just not possible.
It's you're making life more difficult. It's like, why does coffee have to be as complex as white Burgundy all of a sudden? Which I think that's a challenge to the coffee industry, to engage people and to interest them and to draw them in without alienating them by making it seem incredibly complex and intimidating the way that I think something like wine can be.
And I think coffee suffers from some of that. It's a lot simpler. It's just about doing things so that the experience is better, the taste is better. It's not really any bigger deal than that. But also understand that there's a variety and that there could be several coffees you like at different times of the day or that kind of thing.
And no one wants to get lectured about what type of coffee they should be getting at 7:15 in the morning. You want to make it accessible in both terms of being able to buy it and being able to understand it. So it's a challenge, like, hey, this is great, and let me just tell you a couple of things about it, but, don't lecture me at 7 in the morning.
I have to thank Oliver Strand for putting us in touch with all those great, important, special people. What do you think about what they said? What's your reaction?
Well, I may have changed my mind this afternoon after talking to Oliver, darn it. But I think it's a good analogy on the whole. I mean, wine used to be, maybe not in France, but in the United States, it used to be kind of a crappy product that was cheap and you didn't really drink it all that often. And coffee used to be that too. And so they're changing in that way, and they both have different flavors you can talk about, in similar ways, and terroirs you can talk about in similar ways. I think the marketing trajectory is similar. It's way behind wine. But like I said, Oliver's thought about it more, and I think he may be right.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I haven't seen any of these videos, so I'm watching these for the first time. Yeah, I think that the analogy to wine is just a horrible, horrible idea. I think it's just the biggest mistake. Wine is a product that's been around for several thousand years, much longer than coffee. It's been cultivated and developed in a very advanced way for the last 500 years. the people who grow wine also make wine, which is never going to happen with coffee except for a couple of important small cases. And in the end, with wine, the product is this bottle, and the preparation of it is uncorking it. As long as it's been well tended to, then you have the wine that is more or less what the wine should be from the beginning. And in the end, you're making a product with coffee, and it can be ruined at the last minute. So I think that coffee will never measure up to wine in terms of using the vocabulary and in terms of using all those terms. I hope that coffee gets over an inferiority complex and comes up with its own terminology.
I mean, you realize that this is a little bit like being told there's no Santa Claus. I mean, we talk about wine a lot in the industry.
There is no Santa Claus. Actually.
Right.
Yeah, and with wine, there is no Santa Claus. I mean, you're not going to gain anything by using the terminology and the traditions of another product. You're just not. Like, it's interesting with the cheese. Cheese isn't trying to be like, cow wine or goat wine. Whiskey is a wonderful thing, and whiskey isn't trying to be like barley and grain wine. They use their own vocabulary, they use their own terminology, they have their own identifiers, and every one of these is a different product. And then there's should be careful with this, but I think a lot of the people who talk about how good wine is, so I write about food, I write a lot about food, and that's actually 80% of what I do, and I've eaten at a lot of good restaurants and been to a lot of vineyards. I'm not sure that the people who make that comparison have really had extraordinary wines. Like, I love coffee. I love coffee. The best coffee is amazing. The best wine is, coffee isn't there. The best wine is better than the best coffee. And there's what's happening at the high end of wine runs circles around coffee. So if you compare yourself to this highly developed, highly lucrative, highly advanced sector, you're never going to match it. It's just not going to happen. So use your own words. Use your words.
Where do you think that inferiority complex that you're identifying, where does that come from? I mean, it relates a little bit, Melissa, I think, to the backlash sort of thing.
Well, you're newer. I mean, coffee has been around for centuries, but it was crap for many of those centuries. And so it's newer, and people
sometimes literally so these days. Yeah, right.
That stuff's okay.
I find all of this fascinating because I'm like ultimate coffee fangirl, and so I'm thrilled that in the last year I've met barista champions and I've learned about good coffee and all these things. So I'm your biggest fan. I think the whole thing's amazing. If you put 2 cups of coffee in front of me and ask me which one's better, I'm getting to the point where I can figure that out. But I think the idea of making it accessible, and for me to be able to walk into a coffee bar and not have a barista look down his nose at me and tell me I'm not going to know enough to understand what he's making, then I can walk into 3FE in Dublin, which I had the privilege to do recently because Stephen Morrissey introduced me to his friend Colin Harmon, who's the barista champion in Ireland. He makes it so accessible. It's the most fun 2 coffee bars I've ever been to in my entire life. There's a drinking menu and there's a tasting menu. If you want a drink, go in, pick one, they hand it to you with a smile. If you want to taste, there's side-by-side pour-overs, there's the same beans on a board made into an espresso, a pour-over, a cappuccino. You can see how it tastes in the 3 different forms. They'll do tastings with you all afternoon of anything they have in shop as soon as you ask a question. But if you don't ask a question, they'll make you a beautiful cappuccino and you'll pay for it and you'll be on your way. No pretenses, the nicest people, really fantastic coffee, and make it so accessible and fun. I did not see one person sulk in trying to figure out how to order coffee. Everyone was having a good time. And I think it's a great model.
I mean, I think we have that divide even in our audience here, is we have folks who are really interested in elevating that experience from a culinary perspective, because there's so much potential. There's things that are changing and evolving, and origin and our understanding here, the consuming side of the world. And there are also other folks here for whom it's really important that large volumes of containers full of coffee are making their way across the oceans to get here, and this sort of more precious sort of taking your time. In other words, it's sort of the struggle between the daily ritual of coffee and this sort of culinary special wine-ish experience. That's sort of, in struggling with that, what do you think, I mean, from your perspective, how's this going to play out in the next few years?
Well, I think that the coffee is going to get better and better. I mean, like, I don't mean to be so, I guess, aggressive or dismissive of everything that everybody in this room does. I mean, like, I really love coffee. I think it's extraordinary, and I've been able to see in New York we have more access to better coffee every year, every month. It's improving constantly, and the audience is there, and oftentimes, you know, the experience is better. Yeah, so it will become a part of a culinary life, just like everything else. You know, if you take an interest in anything that you ingest, that you eat, you can get a better example of it. If you like bread, there's a bakery over here that might have better bread, or butter. There's a place over there. So I think the coffee will take its role in that. And you know, for New Yorkers, if you like a better coffee, you will find that.